You bunch of weirdos. Welcome back to another episode of Heathen Wyrdos Podcast. Today's episode 8, and we are talking about imposter syndrome. We've all had it, I'll hate it, so we're gonna rant about it. I'm Kenna. I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Sif. I also use she, her pronouns.
Theo, I use they, them pronouns.
And I'm Jay. I use she, her pronouns. And I was choking. That's why it took me a minute.
I'm sorry, Jay.
Straight into the chaos. Alright. So, what the hell's imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome is kind of vague, but it's usually defined as a maladaptive, which is fancy psych speak for unhelpful, thought pattern, where basically you see yourself as a faker, a fraud, or undeserving of praise, success, or even undeserving of a title. For example, Heathen, or in all sorts of other spaces. You get it at work, you get it at school. But I don't go to work or school with you, I just do witch shit with you. So that's what we're going to talk about. So in pagan and witch spaces, imposter syndrome can feel like a couple different things. It can feel mostly like you're not doing enough for your gods. It can feel like your altar isn't big or elaborate enough. And it can show up in other ways like
Haven't done enough research to justify starting your practice, which I can relate to that point so heavily. I have a lot of issues like with reading with my brain, but also it can also make you feel like what just a lot of things are, whatever else makes you feel like you can't do the thing if you're depressed. And it's like, it's really hard for me to do my fucking dishes, so how can I practice? And it's not true. Like, you can still practice in various ways.
And I think a big thing too, people tend to go, well, I don't know enough as this person, or I've only been practicing this long versus someone who's been practicing that long. And
Yeah.
I think comparing yourself to others
Oh yeah.
is another aspect of imposter syndrome too.
Everyone is going to have a different experience. It is highly...
Your mileage may vary.
Yeah, it's honestly, it's highly unlikely you're going to have the exact same experience as someone else in the witchcraft heatheny sphere. Like, they can be similar, but they're not going to be the same. And that's why you really you shouldn't compare your praxis skills, anything, to other people's. Like, do what makes you happy, do what works for you.
I was going to say that's where you see so much imposter syndrome pop up with newer witches, because other people have big fancy altars or leave really intense offerings or every night. It's hard to remember sometimes that people on the internet only show you the good shit. So you really can't say, oh yeah, they do a really intense wine offering to Athena every night.
Yeah.
They just post about it.
Well, and it
doesn't mean they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, finish.
I was gonna say, well, also, like, I've been practicing for 16 years. I have an altar. I don't use it most of the time when I'm doing offerings and stuff like that, because a lot of the times when I'm doing things, I'm on a walk with my dogs through the park in like a wooded area or something like that. You don't even need an altar. You can have one. That's cool. I have one. You don't need it.
And this harkens back to that people on the internet, especially creators, and this is no shade to any of the creators because we're good friends with a lot of creators, but they're gonna stage things, for their socials, because that's their thing. That is how some of them make their money off of it. So they're going to show you the best of the best, and then in 24 hours from taking that picture, it could be completely different. It could be a complete disaster, like a lot of others. Like, the handful of times I've posted a picture of anything to do with my altar, it's been after it's been cleaned and cleansed and perfectly organized, and usually within 48 hours it's absolute organized chaos or completely chaotic, period. So don't feel like, oh, but theirs looks so much better than mine. It's because they staged it that way.
My altar currently...
But that's not how it always is.
My altar currently looks like a bomb went off. Like,
yours too?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like, I do acknowledge that just because this is my preference I'm working on getting a better like storage space for my altar so that I can just put out the stuff I'm using. Because right now it's just one, like it's my hearth, and I just kind of shove shit to the side and like put stuff on the other side for like the various like stuff I'm doing. So like stuff gets real interesting real fast. Millie? Is that necessary?
Millie has thoughts about imposter syndrome.
She's like, don't let people tell you what to do. Millie does not let people tell her what to
It's a
do.
life model.
Be more like Millie.
Be more like Millie. Somebody put that on merch.
Eat
Yes.
your parents'
Are we
crochet
in
project
control of the
patterns. They'll love it. Totally not sad.
Okay, so we just went through our altar isn't good enough for the gods and debunked that whole idea. Let's do the idea that you're not doing enough for the gods. Because that's also bullshit, and the Karen in your brain is lying to you.
Did not
And the people out there who are trying to tell you what you have to do are lying to you as well.
Correct.
Because that's a lot of things too, is you'll see people who do want to have that air of, I know what I'm doing. Just because that's what works for you, buddy, doesn't mean you need to tell people it's the only way to do things. There is no only one way to do anything in any form of paganism.
I appreciate
It's totally okay to do. Go first, Theo.
I appreciate advice. I appreciate tips. I appreciate people giving me resources. I'll be no. So I'm just like trying to find a way that's not a sailor way to say it. I'll be fucking damned if I'm gonna let someone tell me what I have to fucking do. Like,
I love that that's how you landed.
just get fucked, okay?
I know.
Like, do not tell me what to fucking do.
Right. And in that idea, you're gonna have a lot of advice. You're gonna have a lot of people saying this is what works for me. It's totally fine.
And that's cool.
I start out trying to do something one way and transitioning again. So I started out trying to do little candle rituals or whatever every night. That didn't fucking work. And then I transitioned to like, okay, once a week I'll try to do something. And then that didn't fucking work. So after a while, I transitioned to doing something on the full and the new moon, so twice a month. That didn't fucking work. I end up doing whatever I want, whenever I want. Sometimes it's 3 days in a row, sometimes I go 3 months. And it's fine. So if you set yourself a schedule and you can't keep it, it's fine. You're not doing it wrong because you can't keep up with a schedule that you think is good enough. You doing anything is good enough.
I might have a suggestion that goes along with that, especially for new people or people who might have disabilities or might be neurodivergent or have depression, etc., etc. Especially when you're new, just don't set high expectations. Like, set reasonable ones, or if not, like, and play it by ear. Like, if you're starting to go and you're like, actually, it's really great for me to do big things once a week. That's great. Perfect. Do it. If it's only feasible for you to do big things once every 6 months, do that. That does not make you less of a pagan or heathen or whatever flavor you have chosen. And it can honestly, like, that can actually be better for your mental health because you're not, like, when you're being realistic with yourself, you don't get disappointed as easily, if that makes sense. Like, you don't feel like you failed if you haven't met some ridiculous goal that you were never going to be able to achieve anyways. Not happily anyways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also, like, for me, I have stuff that I like to do, like, kind of like a rough outline. But I know if I hit one of my depression swings or if my anxiety is particularly bad at some point, it's okay if it doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
The best thing you can do in your practice is be honest with yourself about your motivation, your ability, your capability. You are not less than for not doing something as often as someone else. Because in any case, people are doing what they can. That's all that's ever been asked.
I would also like to touch back when I said, oh, if you do a big thing every 6 months, it doesn't have to be a big thing. You don't have to do big things at all.
Big is relative. Some people, big is going to be lighting a candle, and for some people, it's going to be
Decking it
old
all
Christmas
out.
tree and a bonfire.
Yeah, like, and that's cool.
Yeah,
Like,
big is relative.
Okay, so we're recording this at actually a really good time for discussion like this. Today is Ostara. And so we're seeing everybody with these big elaborate setups on their altars, and they're baking all this bread, and they're planting these gardens, you know, and they're doing this, and I'm like,
I forgot it was Ostara.
I did too.
yeah, completely forgot it was Ostara. And I'm like, I guess I can do some spring cleaning when we're done with recording. I'm comfortable enough at a point in my praxis where normally, most of the time, it doesn't bother me. And I'm like, my praxis is mine, and it's okay. That does not mean I don't have imposter syndrome every so often. That's something I think we need to remind people, is that I know I've been practicing close to 20 years. Oh God, that makes me feel old. And I still get imposter syndrome. I know, Theo, you've been practicing nearly as long as I have. Do you still get imposter syndrome?
All the fucking time.
That's something I really want to drive home to people, because
Always.
it sucks.
And like, a lot of my offerings are devotional acts. Like, we've talked about like devoting like your beauty routine to Freya or what have you. And like, I work with Andrimnir, and I devote my cooking time to him. And I also like, I'll leave a piece of what I've cooked out as an offering for him. But that's not like some big bells and whistles like ritual. I don't really do those anymore. I do occasionally, like for big holidays, but like today's Ostara, and so I've just decided what I'm gonna do is like, I'm gonna go, it's a little too late to bake anything, but I'm probably just gonna go to the store and grab some apples or something and some baked goods, and I'm having dinner with my family tonight, and that'll be how I celebrate. And that's totally valid. I still like, you know, even like at this exact moment, I'm like, oh, but I should do something, shouldn't I? And it's like, no, I am doing something. That's enough, even if it doesn't feel like a big ritual or anything.
Absolutely. Karen in your brain. You are the manager. Tell her to fuck off.
I like it.
And that's exactly it, is, you know, keep in mind, as much as it sucks, you're always going to have a little bit of imposter syndrome. You're going to have that voice in the back of your head, and like Kenna said, just shut the fuck up. Just shut the fuck up. So,
like, and also yet again, you don't have to do anything big. If how you celebrate holidays or like major points is just by like inviting some friends over, and I mean, fuck, order a pizza if that's what you got. If you make like a simple dinner or like, you know, have a potluck, that's enough.
The other feeling that you haven't done enough research to justify starting, and as resident recon who does all the research and stuff, I want Sif to talk about that.
I mean, turn back time to the Viking Age. You in the 800s. They don't have access to reams of books. They have passed down stories. They have, you know, your small everyday things. They have, I mean, to be honest, you never really know what they did, not in any amount of detail, but they certainly didn't have access to the amount of information we have. In fact, significantly less. They would have just carried down stories between, you know, grandparents to parents to children. They may have had some sort of religious elder in the village or whatnot. But point being is the fact that you have to do research to sit down and worship these gods. There is no rules or anything like that. This is paganism. Hello. You know, there is no dogma, no hierarchy, no written rule list or guidelines specifically for how to sit down and worship. And of course, do it as you want to. It's very independent. It's very personal to you. So there is no baseline for, oh, you must have read this, this, and this before you can start practicing. It's very much in terms of how you connect with your gods.
I've said before that Christians get one thing right, and it is an expert on your faith. You have that faith. It's like the one thing that they get right unequivocally. if you talk to a Christian, they don't all know their entire lore, you know? And pagans could just adopt the mindset that we don't need to know everything about our faith in order to practice it authentically. It would feel a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, and as speaking as the recon, obviously I don't know everything. It's a continual evolution in terms of how I practice and how I worship.
And that's the problem with heathenry. If you're going to try to know everything, you're going to be sorely disappointed.
Damn you, Snorri.
This also goes back to what Nike said last week, was that there is no such thing as 100% recon practice. We don't know everything. There's no way to know everything. So no need to say I'm not recon enough. You are valid no matter how recon or not you are. And don't let anyone else tell you the other.
Ultimately, we don't know what this practice really looked like in practice. How many times have we seen like completely new baby heathens or pagans basically say like, you know, how was this done? What holidays are there? And all like several other questions. And we've basically come around and had to say, well, our nearest guess is this, this, and this. So,
oh yeah,
and I get how irritating that is for people who say may have come from Christianity or all religions with dogma to come into paganism, especially heathenry, where everything is, you know, we have very little first-hand anything, apart from maybe archaeological evidence and a couple of other things, to come in and basically be like, kind of, shrug. Well, here's some stuff that talks kind of around that time about stuff.
Here's
and we have
something that someone
grave.
external, something that somebody else thinks might have been important 20,000 years after the fact. It's fine.
Yeah. I guess to underline it, no heathen is 100% practicing how they did in, say, peak Viking age, 800s, 900s, whatever, what have you. It's just not,
and
it's
that's
impossible.
totally okay.
Yeah.
In my personal opinion on it, like, because Snorri, no one Saxa wrote things or anyone else, but Snorri wrote around 1100. Is that right? So like
12
this wasn't written down. Like, this is basically a super elaborate game of phone tag. Or is it phone tag? Is that what you call that? Telephone. I can word. But yeah, so it's like a big game of telephone, and also we have to take into account Snorri was very Christian. I know there are people that claim he wasn't, but he was. At least that's the information we have, is that he was Christian from historical records. And so we also have to keep in mind that heavy Christianization happened, and also he was only getting what information he could and only writing down what was most important in his opinion. It's kind of like how last episode Nike talked about the Icelandic black books, and Kenna was like, it's, you know, it starts with like, you know, oh God and Jesus and also Thor and Odin, etc., etc. And it's like, okay, let's cross out God and Jesus and see where else we went from here. But I mean, but that also brings in stuff like the saga of the Volsci, which, if you want, you can go read it. Or there's also some YouTubers that have covered it. It's a very interesting saga. But it's also, like, for the time, it was satire. It was to mock heathens. But we can still look at things like that, and we can gather what common practices might have looked like from what they were mocking about the heathens.
I want to go really quickly back to the game of telephone to drive something home. So, funny enough, this comes from one of my favorite comics, Wyrdos, when he's talking about Christianity, but it's something that happens in almost every modern religion, was what you're reading is what some really old magical guy told some other really old guy that you've never met, who then told some other really old guy that you've never met. And then he told people you've never met, who then told someone else that you've never met, and they wrote it down. So you are reading a giant game of telephone. Yes. And I've always loved that whole thing from him. Now, mind you, he's kind of doing some satire on Christianity, but then he admits it's most religions in the world, including his own Hindu. So it's that everything is a bunch of stories that you then have to infer what's real, what's not, what could be possibly real, what's half-truths. And that's all up to personal interpretation. What I may see as quote unquote real or more important to me may be not at all what that is to Kenna or Sif or Theo. So that's something to remember too. Just because what you see as truth isn't seen by others as truth, it doesn't mean that it's not valid for you. But it is one giant game of telephone with old magical guys and old weird guys that you've never met.
Yeah, old bearded
snoring.
Gandalf man.
Damn you, Snorri.
See it like if they start practicing too soon, they're gonna find a way to fuck themselves over. And that applies to just about anything from lighting candles to praying to deity. I think a lot of that comes from older or more experienced witches being jerks and trying to convince younger practitioners that some things are inherently dangerous, like some deities are just bad for beginners, or Loki's evil and dangerous.
Trickster.
Just them being jerks, but also I think that's a whole lot of fucking suitcase Jesus going on there.
And we said this last week too. We're not going to sit there and tell you everything is quote unquote not beginner safe. We are going to tell you that there are certain things that you should have certain foundational practices down before you do them. But, we're never going to tell you that you can't worship something. You can't worship a deity because you don't know X, Y, and Z. Children worship and, pray to deities from the time they're kids all the time. It's when you start bringing them into your magical practice and bringing them into your personal space, that's when we're going to say, maybe you should get some protections up. You should learn how to banish just in case. And you need to have the discernment. But again, it's not, oh, you can't do this. It's, it's closed to beginners. It's
How to do it safely.
And it's something we all do. Right. It's something we all do subconsciously sometimes.
I also want to add on, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
This is only applying to open practices right now. There are definitely initiatory practices where they're not being jerks. Like, you actually need to initiate into them before you do the things, if possible.
Initiatory practices aren't gatekeeping. Deal. Yeah, it seems like a lot of...
And if you're talking, I can't hear you.
My internet's just going in and out.
You're in California. It should be better.
If you do assume anything is good ever. Sad. I was trying to make the point that syndrome comes from Christianity, and that belief... Come on, internet.
Doing
Do the
okay.
thing. And that belief that you're supposed to be living up to a standard, which doesn't really exist in heathenry, paganism, witchcraft, whatever. But I know that for a lot of us, especially for Sif and I, we deal with smooth brain, stupid and bad for believing in gods.
Absolutely. And how many times do we hear about that? I guess it's because we live in a very kind of socially connected world where paganism is a minority religion and atheism is quite prominent these days. So we do hear, obviously, in the pop culture, especially if you're Norse heathen, or I guess any branch of paganism really, is that, our gods are mythological. They don't exist. We've quote unquote evolved past belief in these gods. They're old gods. We've moved forward. And, from the atheist perspective, quite a large branch of polytheism is just ridiculous. Science is way forward, and you're not being logical and all that. And believe me, and I'm sure Kenna will agree as well, that this is so common among people that were atheists that have become pagan, in that you have these goblins sitting on your brain, and in the middle of a ritual, you'd be like, what am I doing? And just in general, when you're just talking about these gods and your practices, that you do have this goblin that just sits at the back of your mind, just kind of saying like, what are you doing? These are myths. These gods don't exist.
You're stupid.
Exactly. And it is so common. And I just want to say, I guess it's another branch of imposter syndrome. And it is, what you're doing is valid. If it makes you happy, fantastic. Your experiences matter. However you feel during ritual, the little warm fuzzies or whatnot are really what's important in terms of do what makes you happy. I mean, we can tie it back into the idea of, these gods are immensely more powerful than we can ever hope to be or imagine or whatnot. Why would they interact with people? And that is also a question that comes up very frequently. And you'll see numerous ideas bouncing around about, similar to the soft and hard polytheism, where you have those that sit on the, they don't interact with us, we're just kind of like sending out little rituals, and they just carry on as they were, to the opposite, which is they interact with us. And if you have an idea about what we've said during our UPG episodes, I think all of us belong to the latter group. And again, that's also another sort of imposter syndrome of, yes, I believe in these gods, why would they interact with us? It's multi-tiered and complicated.
Good lord, it's complicated.
But yeah, the atheist mind goblins, be real.
They do. They're basically, it feels like a kindergartner being a real jackass in the back of your mind. It's not even like good insults.
I never had the atheist thing going on. I had the agnostic, there's something out there. I don't know what it is. And every so often my brain goes, am I sure that this is what it is? Like, really? So even with that, and I sometimes think that atheist goblin and agnostic goblin can sometimes be even worse than suitcase Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Because, suitcase Jesus, you have that framework of, okay, there's, some form of divine creatures, quote unquote, or divine figures. So it's a little, you just have to kind of break down all of the crap that went with that. But when it comes to atheist and even agnostic, it's like, the atheist, I think atheist might be the worst, to be honest, because you guys go from there's nothing, I don't believe there's anything out there, to shit, there's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, there's a fuck ton. You're going from nothing to a whole deck of cards and a half, depending on where you go.
Yeah. You've got some of you'll get this reference. You go from nothing to the Allyman's Tarot of deities.
It's fine. We're doing great.
Yeah, for those of you who don't understand that, the Allyman's Tarot, it's a Kickstarter deck. I'm still waiting on mine to come through. 4 full decks of tarot, plus this random suit from one of the last. So it ends up being 100 and something cards.
So beautiful.
Damn,
that's insane.
The artwork is gorgeous,
right now.
And
should pay you. Should pay you for shilling
that's that's what it feels like. You go from nothing, or you go from a deck of Uno cards to here's 100 and something plus deities, and
It's fine.
Yeah, no, it's an adventure. Going from nothing to all of the above.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think in some ways it's an easier pill to swallow in a way, as in Christianity you have an omnigod,
right?
Who sees all, knows all, power over everything, and I think it's easier to accept slash adjust to the idea of multiple gods who aren't omni, so it doesn't have those limitations that the omnigod does of if they're all powerful, they can't be all good and all that.
Was anyone else here raised Christian?
I was softly. I was christened and all that.
Yeah, so that's the other really fun part that I think, Sif, you'll get this too. Growing up in a Christian view, I went to Bible camp every summer, but I was never super Christian. So I at least had to go through the assumed Christianity and the latent atheism before I could do the polytheism.
Yeah. I went to...
Which was a real shit ladder to climb.
I went to a Bible camp that you could only go to until you were 14, 15, something like that. And you were not allowed to... Okay, because they don't believe in non-binary or trans or anything like that. They believe in cisgender heteronormative at this camp. It's a Lutheran Missouri Synod based camp. And they would take us there. They would teach us the bad about being not heterosexual and cis, and also revere the god and stuff like that. And the girls were not allowed to interact with the boys. That was called purpling, and that was not okay.
Purple?
Yes. Well, because the boys were
that.
blue and the girls were red, and when you put those together, you get purple.
Purple's one of my
I love
favorite
purple.
colors.
But sorry. So I was raised Lutheran Missouri Synod, which there's the Lutherans out there that are like being gay is okay and stuff like that, blah blah blah. They're not those Lutherans at all. So I was raised extremely conservative, and like my entire family were like elders in the church and stuff like that. Let me rephrase that. The men in my family were elders in the church. The woman in my family cleaned the church and took care of it because that was the highest position they could hold. Yeah.
Off.
Oh, and they could also do Sunday school, but they could only do Sunday school up until about age 12 because beyond that you needed a man. Yep.
Oh, that's
Oh, okay.
So I'm not like it just. There's definitely different flavors of Christians out there. I got a very specific conservative one, and I could tell you that like the really conservative mindset that was literally and figuratively beaten into me like is still there. It's really hard to break. Like, and as someone who is super queer, it's just one of those things where it's like it's definitely something I've had to work a lot on, even in therapy and stuff like that. But that's a different story. Yeah, I don't know. It can be hard to switch to paganism, like especially with it's just not common. Is that the phrasing I want?
Very well represented.
Yeah,
at
it's
all.
not. I think it's becoming more represented in the last few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, but more than zero is not a lot, so we're still working on it.
We got one, Kenna. Okay, isn't that enough representation?
Got one.
I'm kidding. I'm joking.
It's close.
Yeah. I don't know. I wish we could all live more happily and in harmony.
And that ties into the importance of
Oh, hey.
allyship.
That was not on purpose.
Wow, incredible.
I mean, I'm all for it. I know that there's, as I briefly touched on, there's a kind of a movement of anti-theism in atheist spaces, but I think it's crucially important for pagans of all varieties to form allyships with atheists. Just because I think our kind of like pathway through life has been quite similar. I just happen to divert onto a pagan path. I think we're definitely seeing atheism growing and paganism growing hand in hand, as people realize that they've got a little bit more freedom in terms of their religious choices, and they don't have to follow what their parents did and what their parents did and whatnot. Because yeah, at the end of the day, paganism is a minority religion, and it's unusual.
So I was raised Christian. I never really vibed with that. I didn't believe in. Well, okay, I am an omnist, so I do believe the Christian God exists in some capacity. But I basically chose not to follow the Christian God starting at like the age of like 10, and had to keep it secret that I wasn't. So basically, like, I think I started dabbling in paganism slightly, or like the idea became appealing to me at like the age of 14, but I didn't like actually adopt the label until I was about 15, 16, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Yeah. So there is definitely a kind of going against the cultural zeitgeist in paganism. I think that draws people, that kind of going against the grain. That's very appealing in terms of modern cultures.
It's also one of the hardest parts because the culture we live in. So much of paganism is based in critical thinking and intuitive thought and discernment, and so much of the modern world is so against intuitive reasoning.
Yeah.
So when you're going with your gut on something, can feel like you're being logic centered. What we're operating on can sometimes feel more like a feeling, a vibe, an intuitive guess, which is valid as long as you can remind yourself that what you're feeling is valid.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it is people, when they start, one thing that I tell people on either path, just a regular pagan path or a witchy path, is one of the biggest things you should do is start learning how to trust your intuition, because it really is a skill. 90% of the people in the world do not immediately trust their intuition. That's a lot of times why I tell people, get comfortable. You don't have to get great. Get comfortable with some form of divination, because that's going to help you start to learn how to trust your intuition.
I can agree with that.
Because you're going to look at the meanings behind cards, ogum, runes, whatever it may be, and you're going to go, okay, so this, that, and this add into this kind of a meaning, and you know what? That makes sense. Or you look at it and your first guess of how it goes, and I don't know, but okay, if I do this to that and then that. So it's the idea you got to learn how to trust your intuition. And like I said, it's a skill, and it's something that a lot of people have a lot of pushback on just personally, because especially when you come from some of the Abrahamic faiths, you're taught to just believe what you're told, not what you feel. So that's one thing to tell that helped me get past my imposter syndrome.
And were you raised religiously, Jay?
No. My family is, we're Jewish. They're Jewish. And it's more culturally than anything. And it was because, like I've said before, my parents are both first-generation American after diaspora families trying to flee from Eastern Europe. So it's more of holding on to those traditions. They probably believe the teachings, but we're not the Jews that go to temple every week, or even light candles every week, or have Shabbos. So I didn't have that throwing into my head. I did do youth group for years, and my sleepaway camp had a Jewish bend, but it was never like, you must believe this, or, So I did also have that, I guess, advantage.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
I think we've covered everything.
Yeah, it looks like we've covered just about everything. The only thing I can think of is the idea of imposter syndrome presenting itself after religious experience, where you're second guessing whether or not you actually had that experience that your brain is telling you definitely had.
I mean, I think that's totally, I was gonna say, I think that's totally valid, especially when you're following your intuition, though, where it's like, is my intuition wrong?
And that's a really good point. It's not necessarily a bad thing to feel inclined to think critically about religious experience. Yeah. I would argue that it's a good thing as long as you are not actively bullying yourself out of your faith.
When you start practicing with intuition and whatnot, and you start getting more familiar, your discernment will develop and become more reliable for you.
And as with anything else that you are learning how to do, it'll take time, be frustrated, and you'll probably punch a pillow at some point because this is fucking stupid and irritating to have to deal with, but that's okay.
Punched a lot of pillows, okay?
Oh, yeah. I threw a tarot deck across the room once, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm not the only one who did that? Yeah, I've done that. What
pull a
the
card
fuck?
And you go, no, fuck you.
Yep.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. And I think that happens a lot when, again, this is because of what you see all over the place. If you see everybody talking about they've had these huge experiences, these huge UPGs, and then yours is just a feeling, you're like,
where did I get ripped off?
What?
It's supposed to be
right. And it's that reminder again that we talked about in the deity episode. Most of the time, most people don't have these huge elaborate UPGs. You just hear more about those because people talk about the ones that are more interesting. No one wants to talk about, I made an offering to hell, and I sat there and I talked to her and I prayed and I felt the tap on my shoulder.
I felt like she smiled at me.
Yeah. Right. I mean, even to the point where I know it was me and Kenna, you said it, the both of us, maybe you too, Theo, I don't remember. We all had the all of a sudden crying during a ritual to hell.
Oh yeah, immediately.
And it's that's that middle ground of okay, it's a little bit more than just a feeling, but I didn't see anything, I didn't hear anything, all of a sudden I just started crying.
No, you're not going to actually meet Freya behind a Denny's parking lot. If we could, but it's not going to happen, and that's fine.
Should we do a disclaimer for God phone people? I think so. Or people with super strong UPG.
Did we go through that on the deity episode? Yeah, we went
Okay,
through
how about
godphones
this?
and stuff.
If our lovely darling listeners, who we all love very much, need a refresher, rewatch it, because I would like to see our view count go up. That's really dramatic. I'm so sorry that I'm like this.
If I'm not, there you.
It's
It
so
is.
on. It's so on brand.
I mean, and also, like, if someone's telling you they're UPG, I'm not telling you to invalidate other people, but, like, you do not have to believe them. I said it.
Someone says that cows are connected for them very strongly and they have reasons for it. You're well within your rights to go, UPG, bro. Leave it at that.
Or, like, oh, okay, yeah, like, that's great that works for you. That doesn't work for me. It's going to be different for everyone. I think the entire, I don't know. Yeah, I think the entire moral, like, this entire episode could almost be summed up with, like, your spiritual practice is going to be different from anyone else's. And that's okay.
And it's normal to question.
It is. It's totally normal. You should question.
Yeah, I was just gonna say you should question everything.
I mean, don't.
But don't talk yourself out.
Yeah, I was like,
of it.
don't bully yourself.
Exactly.
But, like, you should.
Don't bully yourself.
It's normal. It's totally normal to have atheist mind goblins or
Suitcase Jesus time.
Suitcase Jesus.
general goblins. Suitcase
Or
Jesus.
Suitcase Jesus on one shoulder and Atheist Mind Goblin on the other one.
That
That's
does
super
happen.
fun.
Tag team.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Who's the angel and who's the devil in that situation?
I think they're both devils.
Yep.
Oh, there goes the Christian allyship.
No. Actually, that's a really good point. Because, Sif, you did talk about how important allyship is within the atheist community. But I do agree that there should be a lot more allyship with some Christians.
To be clear, we do not.
Because there are really cool ones.
Yeah, we don't hate Christians. We don't. We just like to be treated nicely.
There is a lot of room for good allyship between pagans and Christians.
There is.
One of those steps is going to require that we talk more about Christopaganism.
Sure.
The
Yeah.
intersection of Christianity
literally
and
just gonna bring
paganism
that up.
together. And we should talk about it more. I should find a very cool Christian friend of mine to bring on and talk about it.
That'd be cool.
But that is one of the ways that we're going to build bridges between communities and honestly conquer latent Christianity, because I think this is going to be a real hot take. I think a lot of Christians also deal with latent Christianity, especially the ones who are accepting, who are loving of their neighbors, who are open and entirely supportive of Black Lives Matter and LGBTQ rights, because of the cultural representation of Christianity as a very dogmatic religion, if that makes any sense. And if it doesn't, we can cut it out.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Well, with that, Kenna, would you like to do an episode breakdown?
Yeah. So, recap. Today we talked about imposter syndrome, evil little voice in your brain that tells you that you are not good enough to be a heathen, a witch, a pagan, whatever the hell. We talked about how it's bullshit. You are doing enough for your gods. Your altar is good enough for the gods. Have done enough research. Start your practice, worship, or prayer. Don't listen to Atheist Mind Goblin. Don't listen to Suitcase Jesus. Be friends with people. I think that's it.
Yeah, that's it. Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Oh, that's the last point. Imposter syndrome is a Karen in your brain. You're the manager. Tell her to leave.
Yep. That's going to be a weird reference in like 50 years.
God.
Oh, yeah. Putting it on my...
Oh, God.
Just think, this podcast is going to outlive us.
Hush.
Oh, Sif, can we not get meta right now?
What's a Karen? I don't know. In the year 2000.
Oh, God. Okay. Well, with that, don't forget to weave the connection between the like, subscribe, and bell button. And remember, keep heathenry weird.